Welcome back to the FBS Podcast Climate Adaptation Series. In this deep dive, we're going to explore how loggers are adapting to the realities of climate change and what it means for your business, especially when it comes to those big equipment investments. We've got some really interesting conversations to draw on, talking to folks all over Vermont, New York, Pennsylvania, and even Michigan.
What's really fascinating here is that talking to loggers and foresters and sawmill owners, you get this very real sense of urgency. It's not a theoretical someday problem they're dealing with climate change impacts right now.
Yeah, and it's hitting their wallets hard.
Yeah.
We even heard from a logger in Maine who is spending an extra $1,000 a week just to meet best management practices, BMPs for short. And here's the kicker. He's not even getting paid extra for those efforts.
Wow. Yeah, that really highlights the financial pressure climate change is adding to logging operations. It forces some really tough choices
Yeah.
in how you work and where you can even work.
Okay, so let's break this down. What are the day-to-day impacts climate change is having on logging operations?
Well, the most immediate problem is the shrinking logging season. Shorter winters, less reliable frozen ground. It means less time to get out there and harvest timber. One logger in Rochester, Vermont, told us his winter season was a full 3 weeks shorter than the year before.
3 weeks. That's a significant loss of potential income. No wonder he's feeling the pinch.
Exactly. And that loss of working days has ripple effects throughout the entire supply chain, creates unpredictable inventories for mills, inconsistent work availability for loggers, and everybody ends up with higher overhead costs because of the downtime.
So it's not just about the lost working days. It's the uncertainty that makes it harder to plan and manage a business.
Precisely. And it limits your ability to invest in equipment and infrastructure improvements. That could actually help mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Speaking of investments, you hear a lot about the need for updated infrastructure to cope with these changes. Things like more gravel roads, crane mats, even those portable bridges to handle the increasingly wet conditions.
And these are critical investments, often made by landowners, that can really help extend the logging season. But they come with a hefty price tag and a lot of uncertainty around the return on investment.
Right. It's a gamble, especially for the logger who has to weigh those costs against potentially fewer working days. It's a tough equation to balance.
Absolutely. But, we did hear from a logger in Vermont who's taking a proactive approach to infrastructure. He's installing culverts and carrying extra pipes to manage water flow on logging roads.
So he's taking steps to minimize erosion and keep things moving, even in wet conditions.
Exactly. So by making those smaller scale improvements, he's extending his operational window without relying solely on large-scale infrastructure investments. It speaks to the resourcefulness of loggers in adapting to these challenges.
Okay, so we've talked about infrastructure, but what about the equipment side of things? There's a lot of buzz about new technologies that can help loggers navigate softer ground, stuff like those mechanized harvesters, forwarders, and cut-to-length systems.
Yeah, those technologies can be incredibly valuable, especially for working in challenging conditions. But they often come with a hefty price tag. For loggers already dealing with the financial strain of a shortened season, justifying that kind of investment can be a real hurdle.
Especially when you're not even sure how many days you'll be able to use that expensive new equipment. That's a tough call for any business owner, but I'm guessing some loggers are taking the plunge.
They are. We heard a story about a young logger in New York who, along with his brothers, made a big investment in a cut-to-length system.
That's a bold move, especially with all the uncertainties we've been discussing. What do you think made them decide to take that risk?
Well, it seems like a combination of factors. There's the desire to modernize their family business and stay competitive, but they're also betting on the efficiency gains of the new system, hoping it will offset some of the losses from a shorter logging season.
It makes sense that they would want to invest in the future of their business. And who knows, maybe those efficiency gains will even allow them to expand their operations in the long run. It's definitely a story to watch. But I imagine there are loggers out there who just can't afford that kind of investment right now.
Yeah, that's the reality for many loggers. Thin operating margins and the high cost of specialized equipment were already major challenges. Now, with the added pressure of climate change, it's a real balancing act to stay viable.
So if investing in new high-tech equipment isn't always feasible, what are some other strategies loggers are using to adapt and stay profitable?
Well, we've heard about some really creative solutions. For example, there's a logger in Pennsylvania who found a way to turn a challenging ground condition into an opportunity. He's using a former Marcellus shale well pad as a landing for his logging operations.
That's thinking outside the box.
It really is. He's turning what could have been an obstacle into an asset. And that kind of ingenuity is what's going to be needed to thrive in this changing environment. It highlights the importance of flexibility and finding creative solutions. It's not always about having the latest and greatest equipment, but about maximizing what you have and adapting to the circumstances.
That's a great point. It's about resourcefulness, not just resources.
Mhm.
And speaking of being resourceful, we've also heard about loggers diversifying their operations to create more stability.
Absolutely. We talked to a logger in Pennsylvania, and he picks up work on NRCS projects and does some chainsaw thinning when the weather isn't cooperating for logging. It's a smart way to fill the gaps in his schedule when his equipment would otherwise be sitting idle.
So instead of being entirely reliant on timber harvesting, he's found a way to leverage his skills and equipment for different types of work. I bet that helps him sleep better at night knowing he has multiple income streams.
Exactly. And it's not just about the financial stability. It also allows him to contribute to important forest management activities, like improving wildlife habitat or mitigating wildfire risks.
That's a win-win. And it seems like this kind of diversification could be a key strategy for loggers to adapt to the challenges of climate change. Are there other examples of loggers branching out in interesting ways?
Definitely. We heard from a logger in Vermont who bought a road tractor to diversify into hauling services. It gives him a way to generate income during those slow logging periods. When weather conditions are less than ideal, he even chose a truck that could be used for hauling livestock, showing how creative you can get with maximizing your investment.
Talk about a multi-purpose tool. It's like he's created his own little ecosystem of services.
And that kind of entrepreneurial thinking is going to be essential for loggers to stay viable in the long run. It's about being adaptable, spotting opportunities, and finding ways to leverage your existing skills and equipment for different types of work.
And let's not forget about the role of landowners in all of this. After all, it's their land that's being managed, and they often play a key role in facilitating things like NRCS projects or investing in infrastructure improvements.
Absolutely. The relationship between loggers and landowners is more important than ever. Good communication and a shared understanding of the challenges and opportunities are essential for navigating these uncertain times.
I can see how that partnership could make all the difference. If loggers and landowners can work together to find creative solutions and support each other's needs, that could be a real game changer.
Precisely. And that kind of collaboration might involve things like adjusting harvest schedules to coincide with optimal ground conditions, exploring innovative financing models for infrastructure improvements, or even experimenting with new silvicultural techniques that are better suited to a changing climate.
So it's not just about adapting individual businesses. It's about adapting the entire system of forestry and logging to meet the challenges of a changing climate.
That's exactly right. We need to be thinking about the big picture and working together to create a more resilient and adaptable forest products industry.
It's a big challenge, but I have a feeling loggers are up for it. They've always been problem solvers, and I'm confident they'll find innovative ways to adapt and thrive in this new environment.
I agree. The key is to keep the conversation going, share information, and learn from each other's experiences.
And speaking of learning from each other, we'd love to hear from you. If you're a logger who's found creative ways to adapt to climate change, share your story with the FBS podcast community. Your insights could be incredibly valuable to others facing similar challenges.
Absolutely. We can all learn from each other's successes and failures as we navigate this uncharted territory.
And while we're talking about the future, let's address the elephant in the room, the market. Fluctuating demand for different species adds another layer of complexity for loggers.
It certainly does. We spoke to a sawmill owner in Pennsylvania who mentioned that he's currently focused on sawing softwood from one particular logger's job.
Why is that? Is there something special about that particular softwood?
It's not the wood itself, but the ground conditions. It's the most readily available timber right now. Because of the favorable ground conditions where that logger is working, it shows how weather patterns are directly impacting what types of wood are reaching the market.
That's fascinating. It's like this hidden connection between the climate, the forest, and the marketplace.
And for loggers, it means having to constantly adjust to shifting market demands while also dealing with the unpredictability of weather patterns.
Talk about a double whammy. It makes you realize how important it is for loggers to stay connected to the market and understand those larger trends.
Absolutely. Information is power. And knowing what species are in demand, where the markets are strong, and what kind of pricing you can expect can help loggers make strategic decisions about which timber to harvest and when.
And let's not forget about the trucking shortage that's been affecting the entire forest products industry. Getting logs from the woods to the mill has become even more challenging and expensive.
That's right. And it underscores the strategic advantage of owning your own transportation assets. Like that Vermont logger with his road tractor, it gives him more control over his operations and helps him navigate those logistical hurdles.
So it's not just about harvesting timber, it's about managing the entire supply chain from the forest floor to the mill yard.
Exactly. Loggers are increasingly having to wear multiple hats: business owner, equipment operator, logistics manager, to stay competitive in this evolving landscape.
It's a lot to juggle. But loggers are resilient, they've faced challenges before, and they've always found a way to adapt and overcome.
I agree. And I believe that same resilience will be essential for navigating the uncertainties of climate change. It's about being proactive, thinking outside the box, and embracing innovation.
And don't forget about the importance of collaboration. Loggers, landowners, foresters, mill owners, we're all in this together. By working together, sharing information, and supporting each other, we can create a more resilient and sustainable forest products industry.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
It really highlights how interconnected this industry is. And speaking of interconnectedness, let's touch on the labor side of things. We all know the logging industry has faced challenges, attracting and retaining skilled workers for years. Has climate change made that even tougher?
It certainly hasn't helped. The uncertainties we've been discussing, like the shrinking logging season and unpredictable work availability, make it harder to offer the kind of stability and consistent income that many workers are looking for.
Especially those younger workers who are just starting their careers and may be prioritizing things like work-life balance. It's tough to achieve that when your livelihood is so dependent on the weather.
Exactly. And logging has always been a demanding job, both physically and mentally. It takes a certain type of person to thrive in that environment.
You need to be tough, resourceful, adaptable, all qualities that loggers have in spades. But it's also important to acknowledge the changing expectations of the workforce.
Absolutely. And that might mean finding ways to offer more predictable schedules, investing in training and professional development to attract younger workers, or even exploring new technologies that can make the work less physically demanding.
So it's about adapting not just to the changing climate, but also to the changing workforce.
Precisely. The logging industry of the future will need to be innovative, adaptable, and responsive to the needs of both its workers and the environment.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway for loggers who are listening? What's the one thing you want them to remember?
I think the most important message is this: don't be afraid to embrace change. The climate is changing, the markets are changing, the workforce is changing. The only way to thrive in this environment is to be willing to adapt and evolve.
It's like that old saying, the only constant is change. And loggers have a long history of adapting to change. They've faced challenges before, and they've always found a way to come out stronger on the other side.
I completely agree. And I have no doubt that they'll find innovative solutions to the challenges of climate change as well.
We've seen that innovation already. From those young loggers investing in cut-to-length systems, to that logger in Pennsylvania turning a well pad into a logging landing.
And those are just a few examples. I'm excited to see what other creative solutions loggers come up with as they navigate this new landscape.
It's an exciting time to be in the logging industry despite the challenges. There's so much opportunity for innovation and growth.
I couldn't agree more. It's a time for bold thinking, creative solutions, and a renewed commitment to collaboration.
And remember, the FPS podcast is here to support you on that journey. We'll continue to bring you the latest information, insights, and stories from the front lines of climate adaptation.
So stay tuned, stay engaged, and keep those innovative ideas coming.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, this is Steve Bick with the Forest Business School. Thanks for listening to the FBS podcast, and I hope you will subscribe. The truth is, these deep dives barely scratch the surface of some of the topics we cover in the Forest Business School programs, and the podcast is a way of reaching a wider audience. Check out my website at vtfbs.com for more information. Reach out if you want to talk about one of the FBS programs or have custom training or project needs that you'd like to discuss. Again, thanks for listening to the FBS podcast.